Hey friends, I'm Scott Hanselman. I'm happy to be with you here at DotNetConf 2020 with all of our friends in and around Turkey. How are you all? I'm glad that you're doing a local DotNetConf event. That's where all the fun stuff happens. It's great that we're going to be able to spend time together, even if it's only virtually like this. You know that this is in fact the 10th anniversary of DotNetConf. 10 years we've been doing this virtual conference. We've been inviting our friends from all over the world to have local events like this one that we're doing right now. 10 years, certainly in the past before COVID, we were together in rooms here hanging out in Redmond around the Seattle area, but hopefully we'll be back there again. But for now, we're virtual and that's okay. Now, at DotNetConf, what did we launch? .NET 5 is out. That means general availability of .NET 5. Some of the big features and updates to .NET 5 are things like single file applications, being able to publish a single file. It's going to be smaller than ever. You can just X-copy deploy your .NET application. Especially in the area of smallness, we have smaller container images. Those are even smaller, which is great for really dense microservices. There's a lot going on in the web and the cloud space, and we're doing the best we can to make .NET 5 work well with Docker, Kubernetes, and in the cloud. So you're going to see more and more investment in that space. On the desktop side, we've got lots of improvements to things like WinForms. But one of the things I'm excited about is Windows ARM 64 support for things like the Surface Pro X. I think I have one here. Where's my Surface Pro X? Here we go. Let me grab it. Down here in the corner. There we go. Look at this. So, you know, with ARM devices, they can be really, really, really thin. So having that ARM support for .NET 5 is going to be great as well. Lots and lots of continued performance improvements. You're going to see performance improvements in all things in .NET. I'll have a slide about benchmarking in a little bit as well. And then, of course, all the great new features in .NET, C#9, F#5. Now, things are going really well in the space. There are 2 million .NET Core developers kind of using the Visual Studio family of tools. And so far, for the last 2 years, we've been the #1 most loved framework on Stack Overflow. The one that I like the most is this one here. 40% of people that are new to .NET are students. I think that's really, really exciting. And I hope that you are sharing .NET with your students, with your universities, with people that you teach, because you are all empowered and enabled to go and teach folks .NET, which I think is really cool. Now, all up, there's 5 million monthly active developers in the space. This isn't just people who downloaded .NET. These are people who are actively working in .NET every day. Another exciting thing is that even though you look at tools like WinForms and WPF and you might think that those are older, in fact, hundreds of thousands of people are migrating to .NET Core, which is a huge number. And then this one here, right here, 2 million publishes a month to Linux from Visual Studio. 2 million. Every month, people are publishing to Linux. In fact, I'll show you in a little bit, my websites are now on Linux, on Azure, and I'm saving money, which is pretty sweet. Lots of partners are creating tools and controls for .NET 5. Already, we have controls from all these different partners that are enabling us to make great applications in WinForms and WPF within .NET 5, as well as our .NET Foundation members. All of these are different projects and partners for .NET 5 that are ready to go on day one. Now, remember that I said there was performance improvements. Check this out. This is pretty crazy. These are the Tech Empower performance benchmarks. And if you look right here, #1, ASP.NET Core, ASP.NET Core, basically we're up against the laws of physics here. 7.3 million requests per second. You can only go so fast at this point. We're up there competing with C++, Java, Rust, and Go, getting really, really, really big numbers. In fact, if you look at these performance numbers, we're up 38% on plain text. That's 11.7 million requests per second. 1.5 million, 1.3 million on JSON, and then Fortunes is 500,000 about a second, and that is basically the benchmarking for like full database, full stack. So you can see on the plain text side, you're basically talking about raw throughput, then serializing, and then talking to a database. So really, really big numbers. Personally, on my website, I've seen it get twice as fast just by going from .NET 3.1 to .NET 5. It depends on your application, but the performance improvements are pretty nuts. You can see here that you're getting a 30% socket improvement on Linux just from going from 5.0, from going to 5.0 from 3.1, which is pretty cool. JSON serialization is 20% faster, 19% faster. And then serialization of large collections and arrays, that's one of the reasons that my blog got so much faster, is up 300%, 3x. So big, big numbers. Windows desktop apps are really interesting. The ability to be able to make a Windows desktop application. Now with .NET 5, there's a complete development experience. So that means you've got basically Windows Forms and WPF designers to visually design inside of Visual Studio, including the free Visual Studio community, which is nice. And again, you get all those third-party tools and controls from folks like Infragistics and Telerik. And in fact, those tools and controls can be brought in just by bringing in a NuGet package, which is pretty fantastic. So instead of having to install something into Visual Studio, the visual designer shows up when you bring in the NuGet package. And then, of course, whether you're doing a .NET desktop application or a console app, it doesn't matter. You get all the benefits of .NET 5, and that means self-contained, single file executable. So you can make a single, foo.exe, double click on it, and you don't need to install anything. You don't need to have the .NET framework on the machine. You don't even need to have .NET Core. Everything you need would be packed into that single file executable. You get great performance. It unzips into memory rather than into temporary folders on disk. And of course, we've also introduced modern controls. WebView 2 is actually the Edge browser. It's the Edgium, the Chrome-based Edge browser, and you can just drag and drop a control into your WinForms application, and right away you are set up for success, which is pretty cool. Now on the mobile side, moving away from the desktop, Xamarin Forms 5 is out, which includes that hot reload 2.0, the ability to just make changes and then see the updates automatically with hot reload. And this allows you also to develop iOS apps for, like my new iPhone 12. I can go and develop iOS apps on Windows, do those without a Mac, do the development work before I have to go and deploy that. In fact, we recently added the Academy, which is the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts, and Sciences. Excuse me. We've recently added the Academy. These are the folks that give the American Oscar Film Awards out. And they, in fact, are using .NET, Visual Studio, and Azure. And they're streaming movies to multiple devices using .NET on Azure with App Service and DevOps and ASP.NET. A lot of really cool stuff going on there. We've got some cool customers. Now, Visual Studio 16.8. That GA means general availability. Just go and run the Visual Studio installer. When you run the installer, it's going to pop up like this. Here we go. And it's going to go and check to see what updates there are. You can see here that I've got 16.8, and then I've got the preview, which is 16.9. So as long as you've got 16.8, you're all set up for .NET 5, and that gives you all the new productivity, as well as a new experience for Git, which is pretty cool. I'm also using it for Linux debugging, and I'll show you that in a little bit. I have the WSL preview where I can be in Windows subsystem for Linux, press F5, and actually start debugging from Windows into Linux, which is pretty sweet. Now, I tend to do web and cloud development. So you can do Blazor. That means full stack .NET web apps, whether it be on the server, Blazor server, or compiling and running as WebAssembly. That stuff all works now, and what's great is that the WebAssembly stuff is 3 times faster than the previous release. So again, 300% faster. Pretty fantastic. A lot of people are excited about that. Folks are using Blazor to develop both the front end and the back end. And since they're already writing C#, it really makes it nice for for web developers to get involved. Now on the cloud native side, this is more my speed. We have lots of new enhancements to REST APIs, including Open API and things like Swashbuckle. There's a REPL, read, evaluate, print loop, that allows you to explore your web APIs at the command line. And then client generation. When you make a web API, sometimes you need someone to write code to talk to that. Will generate the client as well. Now that's on the REST side. On the HTTP side, if you want, you can also use gRPC to make more kind of contract-based APIs, and we've got really great performance in that space as well. And then of course you put all of that inside a cloud native, whether it be Kubernetes or Docker Compose. We're going to have smaller and faster microservices because the container images are smaller, way smaller. I'll show you in a minute when I can actually take my website and bring it up into Docker as well. Now, I recently moved my blog and my podcast and my main website up into Azure App Service, which is pretty cool. What's nice is that was available on day one. So that means I could put my .NET website in Azure App Service the day that .NET 5 came out. And that was really cool. If you take a look at one of my videos from .NETConf on launch day, I actually went through that process and I showed you me upgrading my website. Although I did it in production, it's probably not the smartest thing that I've ever done. In fact, let me switch over into the browser here. Switch over into Visual Studio here and take a look at this project file. This is my main website. So this is Hanselman.com. So if we were to go and visit that, in fact, here, I'll put it right there and I'll say Hanselman.com. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and I'll zoom in right here, and you can see that it's powered by .NET 5. Okay. All I had to do was upgrade from 3.1 to .NET 5. In my case, I had a simple application, so I didn't even have any major changes, no code changes at all. It just built. Now that means that I could go out to the command line right now and I could say, go to Hanselman.com. Here we are, and just say .NET build. And this will be using .NET 5, and it built, and it's out there, and it's available. There we go. And then when I drop that up into Azure, when you hit Hanselman.com, it loads very fast, because if we look at Azure, here I'm going to log into my own personal Azure portal. I'll go look at the Hanselman blog. Where's the home one? There we go. Here's the core. You notice here I've got a couple thousand requests happening a little over here. I've got about 40 requests a second coming in. Everyone's chilling. Look at this. My response time is basically 6 milliseconds on average, with peaks up in the 10 or 15. So working really nicely, no errors, no major issues on my personal site. And then because I'm on Azure, I can just go in here to configuration, general settings, and you see that .NET 5 is right there. So right on Azure on day one, which is pretty cool. I was very happy about that. Now, if I was going to start doing microservices, I might use Project Tye, T-Y-E. Project Tye allows you to do service discovery and plug in different services and different front ends, then figure out what their dependencies are. If a service decides to use SQL Server or Redis or whatever, it's totally up to them. Rather than having to do this automation in batch files and scripts, you can pull it all together with Tye and basically run locally on your system on Kubernetes, and it will give you a local dashboard that basically allows you to go and build all of your microservices faster. The Project Tye is something to be watching out for because it really automatically Dockerizes and deploys your container-based applications to Azure Kubernetes Service, or AKS. Okay, so if .NET 5 is out, sometimes people get confused about the version number. Let's take a look at this. Remember that the plan was to unify .NET. You've got Mono and Xamarin, you've got .NET Core, you've got the existing .NET Framework 4.x. We want to unify that into one wave. That means one version of .NET single SDK, single BCL, single base class library, then unify the tool chain, allow someone to have both a native UI and a web UI that's cross-platform, and make everything in the cloud work better. And then continue to make speed, size, diagnostics, and Azure light up. Okay, so here's what the schedule looks at. Let's take a look at this. So the schedule here is November of 2020. That's now. .NET 5 is out. Every other year, we will release a version of .NET that is the LTS, or the long-term support version. That's the one that will get multiple years of support. So then on the even-numbered years, like 2020, 2022, 2024, we'll release a version of .NET that doesn't have long-term support. So you'll have the current version, and then you'll have the LTS version. So if you want to pick a version that's going to be really actively supported, you're going to get regular security patches, it's going to be supported for many, many years, you'll get an LTS version of .NET. Right now, the LTS version of .NET is .NET Core 3.1. And in fact, if I go back over to my browser and I go to the .NET website here, .NET, and I hit download, you see here, there's the current version and then the long-term support version. So it depends on how your company thinks about things and whether or not you want to have that long-term support. But regardless, .NET 5 is available now. So all you need to do is go get it, or just update your Visual Studio 2019 to update 16.8 or above. So I'll show you what I ended up doing with my application. It really was not that complicated. This again is my main website right here. And of course I can go and publish this if I wanted to, and I'll get the new publish dialog that will then publish it. And you can see here that I've got the .NET 5 framework called out right there in Visual Studio, the resource group that I want to go and send it to. Or I could use a Azure DevOps system. So I chose to do that. So if we go to Hanselman Visual Studio, which is the Azure DevOps, you could also certainly choose to use GitHub Actions. We've got my main websites, my personal website, my podcast, and my blog. And the personal website we'll go ahead and we'll click on, and then look at the pipeline. This pipeline, we go and do an edit. You can see inside of our CI/CD that we are using .NET Core 5.0.x, okay? That's really important. That 5.0.x right there is telling it which version of the .NET framework to download and run on. And the reason that it has the X there is as 5.01 or 5.02 come out, it's going to regularly get updated. Now what's nice about this is I can go back and hit pipelines and look at this running. Okay, so let's see my website getting updated. You can see here where it says, all right, I'm about to install the .NET SDK 5.0, can't find it in the cache. Then it downloads it, installs it, and sets you up for running that. So then my application builds and publishes right here in the cloud. You can see we're publishing .NET 5.0 for Linux, and that's the hanselman.com main website there. Okay. Next, I went and did the same thing, except I did it for my podcast. My podcast is over here. You should check that out. That's at hanselminutes.com. It's a little more complicated of a website. It's got lots of different shows. You should definitely check it out. And if I scroll down to the very bottom, right now, that is on .NET 3.1.x. Okay, so how would we go and update that? Well, the same thing. I just come in here, to Hanselman Core, edit the project file, and I change my target framework to make sure that that works. Now remember I mentioned Docker and containerizing things before. I can do the same thing here. Let's go out to the command line, go to the Hanselman website. There's our Docker file. Let me open that. I'll open that with Visual Studio Code. There's our Docker file. Docker file. There we go. We open that up. Here, I'm going to use the .NET SDK 5 right there. So that's actually one of the Docker containers that we've published for .NET 5. And then here, I've changed my runtime. You see before I think I had 2.1, I don't know why. Here we've got ASP.NET 5.0 published as the runtime. And now, let's try this from the command line. Docker build. So I'm on a machine here. Let's see, where's our Docker? Docker run. Do I have Docker build? Docker build, here we go. Docker build. Let's see if, okay, so you see it just popped an error up because I don't have Docker running. I want to run Docker desktop. When I do that, while that's happening, I'll point out that I've got the ability, of course, to run Ubuntu on this machine. So on the right-hand side up here, I've got Ubuntu. I think this is, oops, I don't need that window. I think this is Ubuntu 18.04. Now, if I say Docker images, now I've got Docker running, and what's nice is it's actually running in both places, so I can use Docker in both places. Okay, so these scripts will run in two different ways. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to say Docker build. I'll start building Docker. There we go. And we're going to go and build this. And there we go. It's already going. Okay. And this is now running on our Linux-based Docker subsystem. So I'm doing the build inside Docker. I'm testing it against Linux. Then I can go and deploy it up into Azure App Services for Linux if I want to, which is very, very nice. So here we go, running .NET build. It'll also start running the tests as well and test my application. You can see right there, just released into .NET 5 Hanselman. Now it's going to go and run the tests against them. I think I have one test that I'm currently working on that's failing, so I might get a little bit of a warning on that one. See if we finished any more of our tests. Oh, there we go. So I have one failed test that I need to work on that's not related to .NET 5. It's just related to me being a lousy programmer. And I'll be able to have my main page updated as well, which is pretty cool. So lots and lots of fun stuff happening in the .NET space right now. And I just want to say again how much I appreciate you all, my friends in and around Turkey and the general area, for hanging out with us. Thank you for letting me do a little bit of an opening here for DotNetConf 2020. There's going to be a lot of great speakers for the next little while. So why don't you sit back, enjoy yourself, and I will see you later. Thanks again.